The year was 1917. December snow fell thick and silent over the Montana high country. Inside a timber cabin, firelight danced against rough-hewn walls. Two figures sat in the amber glow. The older man, 75 now, his hands gnarled like old roots, stared into the flames. The younger, barely 17, waited. Wade Cooper had lived long enough to watch the frontier die, to see the wild places tame the buffalo vanish, the railroads carve steel scars across sacred ground. But some memories refused to die with the century. Some stories demanded telling. Between them on the table lay a Winchester rifle, model 1873. The brass receiver caught the firelight. 7 notches marked the stock, each one a ghost. James Cooper, the old man's grandson, shifted in his chair. Outside, wind howled through the pines. Europe was burning with war. In 3 weeks, James would board a train east, would cross an ocean, would learn what his grandfather already knew, that some men are tested by fire and some by ice. "You asked about your grandmother's scar," Wade said. His voice was gravel and whiskey worn smooth by 7 decades. "The one on her neck she never talks about." James nodded. He had noticed it since childhood. Sister Grace Mitchell Cooper wore high collars year-round. Even in August heat, even at 73 years old, she hid that mark. "That's a story about the devil's brand," Wade continued. "About when the mountain judges better than men. About how sometimes boy doing the right thing costs you everything. And sometimes it gives you more than you knew you lost." The fire popped. Sparks climbed toward the ceiling. It was winter of 1887. I was 45. Thought I'd buried my past deep enough it wouldn't find me. I was wrong. Wade reached for the Winchester. His fingers, thick with age and scarred from decades of hard living, traced the notches. "A man isn't measured by the gun in his hand, James. He's measured by the reason he draws it." The old man's eyes found his grandson's. "What I'm about to tell you, it ain't a clean story. Ain't one where good wins easy and evil dies simple. But it's true. Every word. And before you go off to France to fight your war, you need to understand something about being a man, about when to kill, about when to mercy, about when the hardest thing is just to keep walking when every fiber tells you to lie down and die." James leaned forward. Outside, the wind carried snow against the windows like thrown salt. Wade began. "Ooh, the frozen trail. 30 years earlier. Same mountains, different man. Wade Cooper rode the trap line at first light. Temperature hung 20 below. His breath frosted the beaver pelt collar of his buffalo coat. The sky was bruised iron. A blizzard was building in the west, piling darkness against the peaks. He was 45 years old and had been alone for 10 years. Alone suited him. People lied. People betrayed. The mountain just killed you if you were stupid, and Wade respected that kind of honesty. His mule Dusty picked her way through snow that reached her chest. 12 years old, 900 pounds of stubborn reliability. She knew the trail better than Wade did. When you lived this high, this remote, a good mule was worth more than gold. Wade checked his traps methodically. 12 conibears for beaver. 3 had been triggered. 2 held frozen pelts. 1 held nothing sprung by a falling branch or hungry wolverine. He reset them with practiced efficiency, working with bare hands despite the cold. Gloves made you clumsy. Clumsy got you killed. The Winchester across his saddle was a 73 model. 44-40 caliber. They called it the gun that won the West, though Wade thought the West wasn't won so much as taken. The rifle held 15 rounds if you topped off the tube. Wade kept 14 loaded hammer on an empty chamber. Safety first. Old habits from when he wore a badge. That badge was buried now. Tarnished brass at the bottom of a saddlebag he hadn't opened in 5 years. U.S. Marshal, Kansas District. Another life. Another name. Another man who believed in law and justice, in the fundamental goodness of civilization. That man died in a burning farmhouse outside Topeka. His wife died there too. His 7-year-old son. Wade Cooper was what crawled from the ashes. He was checking the 12th trap when he saw it. Not an animal, not a natural thing. A shape. Wrong angles. Wrong colors against the white. A wagon, or what remained of one, smashed against a lodgepole pine like God's fist had swatted it from the trail. Wade's hand went to the Winchester. He jacked around into the chamber, the lever action, smooth as silk, the metallic chick-chack loud in the frozen silence. Dusty's ears swiveled forward. She smelled something. The wagon was a buckboard. Cheap construction meant for freight, not speed. The horse was gone, either cut loose or dead beneath a drift. The bed had split open on impact, scattering supplies across 50 yards of snow. Wade approached slowly. His eyes scanned for tracks, for ambush, for any sign this wasn't just an accident. You lived this long in the high country by assuming every situation wanted you dead. He circled the wreckage, saw boot prints already half filled with new snow, hours old maybe, one set, small, then nothing. Trail ended where drifts had covered everything. Wade dismounted, tied Dusty to a standing timber, advanced on foot. The wagon's undercarriage had caught fire at some point. Black char marked the wood. The smell of burned pine resin hung faint in the air. Something had sparked. Lantern oil, maybe. Or the friction of the crash. Wade dug into the debris pile, expected frozen supplies, flour sacks, preserved meat. Instead, his hand found fabric. Wool. Thick weave. Gray. He dug faster, pulled away snow with both hands now, the cold biting his exposed skin. His fingers found a shoulder, then a head wrapped in layers of scarf. A woman, curled fetal beneath the snow's blanket. Blue-lipped, still as carved stone. Damn it, Wade muttered. His voice rasped from disuse. He hadn't spoken to another human in 6 weeks. He reached for her wrist, felt for a pulse with 2 fingers. Counted to 6. Nothing. Wade was about to turn away, leave the dead to the mountain as was the way. But something made him pause. A flicker of movement. Her eyelid. The smallest twitch. Live. Barely. Instinct took over. Wade scooped her up. She weighed maybe 100 pounds. Less than a sack of feed. He threw her across his shoulder in a fireman's carry and turned for Dusty. The blizzard hit. One moment visibility was a mile. The next the world vanished into howling white. Wind velocity jumped from 10 to 40 in seconds. Temperature plummeted. Wade's exposed face went numb instantly. He couldn't see Dusty, couldn't see his hand in front of his face, but he knew the way. 1,500 steps southwest, then 1,200 northwest, then 800 straight through the gap in the cedars. 2 miles, 40 minutes if he didn't fall, if he didn't drop her, if he didn't lose the trail and wander off a cliff in the whiteout. Wade started walking, counted his steps. The woman on his shoulder was dead weight. Her body temperature pulled heat from his. Every minute he carried her, his core temperature dropped a fraction of a degree. Hypothermia didn't announce itself with trumpets. It crept, whispered, promised rest. At step 712, Wade's boot found ice beneath the snow. He went down hard knees, slamming hidden rock. Pain shot through his joints like lightning. But he didn't drop her. Couldn't. Some instinct older than thought wouldn't let him. He rose, kept walking, kept counting. At step 1490, his cabin materialized from the storm like a miracle, like salvation in log and clay form. Wade kicked the door open, stumbled inside. The cabin was cold as a tomb. The fire had died hours ago. He laid the woman on the buffalo robe near the stone hearth and immediately began feeding the coals. Dry pine splinters, then kindling, then split logs. 3 matches. The first 2 were damp, hissed, and died. The third caught. Flame bloomed. Heat followed, hesitant at first, then growing. Wade turned back to the stranger. In the firelight, he could see her properly now. Young, maybe 25, dark hair plastered to a too pale face. Her lips were purple. Her skin had the waxy translucence of advanced hypothermia, but she was shivering. Violent tremors that shook her whole frame. That was good. Shivering meant the body was still fighting, still trying to generate warmth. Wade knelt beside her, started removing the wet outer layers. Her coat, her boots, her soaked wool dress underneath. He worked with clinical efficiency, no thought beyond survival. He'd done this before. Pulled men from frozen rivers, warmed soldiers near death from exposure. Then her eyes opened. Green, wide with terror that had nothing to do with cold. She clawed at her throat, at the thick gray scarf wound multiple times around her neck. Her fingers scrabbled at the wool like it was strangling her. I can't, the words were ground glass. I can't breathe. Wade moved closer. Easy. You're safe. It's just the cold and the altitude affecting your... No. She thrashed her face, turning a dark mottled violet. She was suffocating right in front of him. The cloth. Take it off. Wade understood. The wool had frozen solid while she lay in the snow. Now warming by the fire, the ice was melting. The fabric was swelling, constricting as it thawed. It was a tourniquet around her windpipe. He pulled his Bowie knife from its sheath. 12 inches of carbon steel honed to a razor edge. He'd used it to skin elk, to cut rope, to defend his life twice. Now he used it to save hers. Hold still, Wade commanded. His voice had the flat authority of a man used to being obeyed. He pinned her shoulder with his left hand, slid the blade carefully beneath the layers of wool at her neck edge, turned outward to avoid her skin. With a sharp upward jerk, he severed the cloth. The wool fell away. The woman gasped, a massive inhalation that sounded like a sob. Her whole body convulsed with the effort of breathing. Then she slumped back exhausted. But Wade didn't move, didn't speak, didn't breathe. His hand still holding the knife trembled. He stared at her exposed neck. There was no bruise from the cloth, no injury from the wagon crash. Instead, burned into the pale skin directly over her jugular was a brand, a circle with a vertical line through the center, bisected by a jagged lightning bolt, the mark of the prophet. Wade's heart stopped cold. The blood drained from his face, leaving him looking older, more terrified than he'd ever looked facing a grizzly or a gunman. He knew that mark. He'd seen it once before, seared into the flesh of his wife's corpse. Before they burned her, before they burned his son, before they burned everything he'd ever loved. 10 years. 10 years he'd run. 10 years he'd hidden in these mountains, changing his name, burying his past. And now the past was lying on his floor, branded like cattle, bringing death to his door. 3. The interrogation. The cabin fell silent, save for crackling pitchwood and the woman's ragged breathing. Wade stood slowly, backed away from her as if she were a coiled rattlesnake. His eyes never left that brand. He walked to the window, wiped a circle in the frost with his palm. Outside, the world was a gray madness of wind and snow. But in his mind, he was somewhere else. Wow. Somewhere else. Kansas, 1877, the smell of smoke, the sound of chanting, his farmhouse in flames, Margaret's body in the ashes, that same mark burned into her throat. Thomas, 7 years old, too small, too fragile, too innocent. Who are you? Wade's voice cut through the silence like the crack of a whip. He turned, a hand dropping to the colt at his hip. The woman blinked, her vision clearing. She looked at Wade's face, saw the knife still in his hand, the gun at his belt. But she didn't scream, didn't beg. She looked resigned, as if she'd expected this. "My name is Grace," she whispered. "Sister Grace Mitchell." "You're a nun." "I was, before..." Her hand went to her throat, fingers touching the brand, then flinching away. "Before the prophet." Wade's jaw clenched. "That mark, you know what it is?" "Yes." "You know whose mark it is?" "Yes." "Then you know why I should put a bullet in your head and leave your body for the wolves." Grace met his eyes. There was fear there, but also something else. Something Wade recognized because he saw it in his own reflection every morning. The eyes of a survivor, someone who'd walked through hell and somehow kept walking. "I'm not one of them," she said quietly. "Not anymore. Not by choice. Never by choice." Wade kept his hand on the colt. "Talk, fast. And if I think you're lying even once this conversation ends." Grace sat up slowly, pulled the torn scarf around her shoulders for warmth, careful to keep the brand covered. When she spoke, her voice was steady despite the cold, despite the fear, despite everything. "I was raised in St. Louis, Carmelite orphanage. My parents died when I was 6, cholera. The sisters took me in, taught me. When I turned 18, I took preliminary vows. They sent me west, missionary work, Wyoming Territory, 1880. And," Wade's finger rested on the Colt's hammer, "we encountered a group in Cheyenne. They called themselves the Sanctified, said they were building New Eden, a place of peace, of faith. Their leader introduced himself as Reverend Caleb Thorne, said he was a Reformed Methodist minister seeking to spread God's word." Wade's hand tightened on the gun grip. That name, Caleb Thorne. Grace continued. By the time I realized what they really were, I was isolated, miles from any town, surrounded. The other sisters who came with me, some joined willingly, some didn't have a choice. Those who tried to leave, she stopped, swallowed hard. They didn't leave, Wade finished. No. When did he brand you? June 12th, 1883? I was 21. Caleb called it the consecration, said it marked us as brides of the new kingdom. There were 47 of us by then, all branded, all kept in a compound. Wade walked to the table, sat down heavily. His mind raced through calculations. 47 women. If even half tried to resist, the bodies, the graves. How many? Why did you run? He asked. Grace's hands clenched into fists. Tonight was supposed to be the cleansing. My turn to be purified. Wade didn't need to ask what that meant. He'd heard stories, ritual sacrifices, women who went into Caleb's tent for purification and never came out, or came out changed, broken. There's more, Grace said. She reached inside her wet dress into a hidden pocket sewn into the lining, pulled out a leather-bound book, 8 inches by 5, thick, heavy, water-stained but intact. Wade stared at it. What is that? The Ledger of Saints, Caleb's insurance, his protection, the reason he's untouchable. She handed it to Wade. He opened it, began to read by firelight. The first 20 pages were names, women's names, 47 entries, each with a date of consecration, just ranging from 16 to 35. Addresses before they were taken, their real names versus their given saint names. Grace Mitchell was number 23. Pages 21 through 80 detailed finances. Tithes from believers totaling $47,000. Illegal timber operations bringing in $23,000. Bank robberies in 5 territories adding $91,000 more. $161,000 total, enough to buy half of Montana territory, enough to fund an army. But pages 81 through 150 made Wade's blood run cold. The protection list, names, real names, men in power. Judge Harrison Whitmore Helena, $800 per month, owned 20% of Caleb's timber mill. U.S. Marshal Thomas Brennan Billings, $500 per month, had forgotten to serve 2 federal warrants for Caleb's arrest. Sheriff Daniel Polk Butte, $300 per month, tipped off Caleb before every raid. Richard Ashford, aide to the territorial governor. Blackmailed with photographs. A young bride who wasn't his wife. Compromising positions. Samuel DeWitt, president of First Montana Bank. Laundered Caleb's money through ghost accounts. Took 10% for his trouble. The list went on and on. Judges, lawmen, politicians, businessmen, all bought, all compromised, all complicit. Wade closed the ledger slowly, set it on the table. His hands were shaking. If this gets out, he said quietly, Montana Territory's government collapses. That's why I took it, Grace said. Without that ledger, Caleb loses his protection. He's just another outlaw, one the law can actually touch. Wade looked at her with new eyes. This wasn't just a runaway bride. This was someone who'd planned, who'd waited for her moment, who'd stolen the one thing that could bring down a kingdom built on blood and fear. You're braver than most men I know, Wade said. I'm not brave, Grace replied. I'm desperate. There's a difference. Why tonight? Why run during a blizzard? Grace's face crumpled. For the first time, tears welled in her eyes. Because I wasn't the only one being purified tonight. Caleb had other plans, plans that involved... She stopped, took a shaking breath. I have a son, Samuel, 6 years old. Wade felt the room tilt. A nun with a child. Caleb married me in a ceremony 7 years ago. I was 19. I didn't have a choice. I never had a choice. Her voice broke. Samuel was born in 1882. Caleb's been raising him as his heir, training him to be a soldier of God, turning him into a monster, Wade finished softly. I couldn't let that happen. So I took Samuel, stole a wagon, rode until the horses were foaming, until the storm hit, until I crashed. Wade's mind flashed back to the wreckage, to the wagon bed. He'd pulled Grace from the snow but hadn't checked underneath, hadn't looked beneath the buckboard's floor. Where's the boy now? He demanded. I hid him under the wagon bed, false bottom. Before I crashed, I told him to stay hidden no matter what. When I woke up, the boards had been kicked out from the inside. Samuel was gone. Wade stood, began pacing. 6-year-old boy, lone in a blizzard. Air temperature 20 below. Wind chill at 40 below. How long? All hours 5. Time of death in these conditions for a child his size, Wade said, thinking aloud. 2 hours, maybe 3 if he found shelter. How long since the crash? I don't know. Everything's blurred. Hours. Could be 5. Could be 6. Wade stopped pacing, looked at Grace, saw the desperate hope warring with terrible certainty in her eyes. Then Dusty brayed, loud, sharp, the sound of alarm. Wade's hand went to his Winchester. He moved to the window, wiped the frost again, peered into the storm. At the edge of the clearing, 50 yards out, a shadow moved. Not an animal. Too upright, too still, too deliberate. A man on horseback, sitting motionless, watching smoke rise from the cabin chimney. Even through the snow and distance, Wade recognized the silhouette. The wide, flat-brimmed hat, the long duster coat. Is it him? Grace whispered behind him, voice tight with terror. Is it Caleb? No, Wade said, racking the Winchester's lever with a metallic snap. That's not Caleb. That's Nathan Crow, his head tracker. As if summoned by the name, 3 more riders emerged from the tree line. They didn't charge, didn't shout, just sat their horses in the blowing snow, waiting. They found us, Wade said quietly. What do we do? Grace's panic was rising. Wade turned from the window. His face was carved from granite, eyes cold as the storm outside. We don't die. Not tonight. He moved to the back of the cabin, kicked aside a worn rug revealing a trap door cut into the floorboards. A root cellar dug 10 feet down. Get in, he ordered. If they burn us out, heat will kill you up here. Down there, you have a chance. What about you? I've got a conversation to finish with Mr. Crow. Wade pulled the trap door open. Grace climbed down into darkness. Wade closed it behind her, kicked the rug back in place. Then he returned to the window. Opened it just a crack, enough to slide the Winchester barrel through. The wind howled in bringing snow and bitter cold. Cooper, a voice called from outside. It carried across the clearing, despite the wind. We know you're in there, old man. We know you have the girl. Wade didn't answer. He sighted down the barrel, waiting. You hear me, Cooper? Crow shouted. Send her out and we leave you to your rat hole. Still Wade waited, finger on the trigger, breathing slow. Caleb knows you're here. Crow's voice took on an edge. He says he forgives you for the past. He just wants what belongs to him. Wade squeezed the trigger. The Winchester's report cracked like thunder. The sound echoed off canyon walls. Crow's hat flew off his head, spinning into the snow 20 feet behind him. You tell Caleb, Wade roared into the storm, that the only thing waiting for him here is a shallow grave. The response was immediate. A hail of lead hammered the cabin. Wood splintered, glass shattered. Bullets punched through the clay, chinking between logs like fists through wet paper. The air filled with flying debris and the smell of gunpowder. Wade ducked low, crawled across the floor as his cabin became a killing box. 40 rounds, maybe 50. They were trying to turn the logs into splinters. Then came the fire. The first arrow hit the roof with a solid thunk. Wade looked up, saw orange flames spreading across the cedar shakes. They'd wrapped the arrowheads in pitch-soaked cloth. The dry wood caught instantly. Another arrow, another. Within seconds, his roof was ablaze. Wade made his calculation. 2 minutes until the roof collapsed. 3 before smoke overcame him. 4 before the whole structure was an inferno. He crawled to the cellar, opened it. Time to go. Grace climbed out. Her eyes were wide, reflecting the growing firelight from above. Wade moved to the window. Before he'd built this cabin, he'd lived through an attack by Blackfoot raiders. Learned from it. He'd sawed through the bottom log at the back wall, created an escape route, a bolt hole hidden behind the stacked firewood. He kicked the wood aside, pulled the latch. The log swung inward. Through there, he ordered. Stay low, get into the brush, wait for me. What are you doing? Evening the odds. While Grace crawled through the opening into the snow beyond, Wade grabbed what he needed: a bear trap from the wall, a new house number 6, 40 pounds of iron and serrated teeth. He set it quickly, muscle memory from 100 trap lines. The mechanism clicked into place with a sound like breaking bones. He placed it directly under the front window, covered it with a thin layer of debris. Then he grabbed his emergency kerosene, the lamp oil he kept for long winters, poured it in a line from the trap to the door. The fumes made his eyes water. Wade struck a match on his thumbnail, touched it to the kerosene. Flame raced along the line, hit the door, created a wall of fire 6 feet high, separating the trap from the entrance. Wade didn't wait to admire his work. He dove through the bowl hole as the first rider kicked in the door. The scream that followed was unhuman, high-pitched, garbled with agony. The bear trap had found a leg, steel teeth buried in flesh and bone. The man's shrieks cut off abruptly. Shock or death. Wade didn't care which. He rolled into deep snow behind the cabin. The cold was shocking after the heat. 30 degrees difference in 3 seconds. His exposed skin went numb. Grace was there, huddled behind stacked firewood, shaking violently. "Come on!" Wade grabbed her arm, pulled her toward the tree line. Behind them, his cabin of 10 years became a beacon. Flames consumed the roof with a sound like tearing canvas. Sparks climbed hundreds of feet into the storm. The structure groaned, supports giving way. They were 100 yards into the timber when the roof finally collapsed. The crash echoed across the valley. A geyser of sparks shot skyward, briefly turning night into day. Wade looked back once, saw his past burning. Everything he'd built in 10 years of solitude. The only home he had known since Kansas. "I'm sorry," Grace whispered beside him. Wade's jaw was set. His eyes reflected the distant flames. "Don't be. It was just wood. We're alive. That's what matters." They pushed deeper into the forest. The trees here were thick. Lodgepole pine packed so tight you couldn't see 10 feet in any direction. The snow was waist deep. Wade broke trail, forcing his legs through the drifts in high, exhausting steps. Behind them, voices shouted, "Organize! Regrouping!" These weren't random thugs. They were trained, disciplined, dangerous. Wade counted heads mentally. 4 riders initially, 1 down in the bear trap, 3 left, plus however many Caleb was bringing with his main force. They had maybe an hour head start, maybe less. "Where are we going?" Grace gasped behind him. She was struggling, the altitude, the exertion, the hypothermia she'd barely survived an hour ago. All of it was draining her. "Devil's Throat," Wade said. "That's suicide in winter. It's a narrow pass, horses can't follow, levels the playing field. People die at Devil's Throat." "People die everywhere," Wade replied. "At least there we choose how." They climbed. The terrain grew steeper. The trees thinned as they gained elevation. 8,000 feet, then 8,500. The air grew thinner. Breathing became work. Grace fell. 4th time in 20 minutes. Each time she got up slower. Wade stopped, turned, looked at her in the darkness. Her lips were blue again. Her skin had that waxy translucence. Hypothermia wasn't a single event. It was a process. She was dying by degrees. "Can't," she mumbled. "Just let me sleep." Wade knelt, grabbed her shoulders, shook hard. "You sleep, you die. Is that what you want? You want Caleb to win." At the name, something flickered in Grace's eyes, not hope, hate, pure and burning. "No," she hissed through chattering teeth. "Then move." Wade stood, began to remove his buffalo coat. Beneath it, he wore a thick wool jacket, warm enough for most work, not warm enough for what was coming. He draped the massive coat over Grace's shoulders. It swallowed her, dragged in the snow, but the residual body heat hit her like a furnace. "You'll freeze," she protested weakly. "I'm made of tougher stuff than you," Wade lied. He was already cold. In 2 hours without the coat, he'd be hypothermic. In 4 dead. But 4 hours was all he needed. They trudged on. Grace moved better now with the coat. Wade's pace slowed as cold crept into his core. But he didn't show it, didn't acknowledge it. Pain was information. Information could be ignored. "On the mountain," Wade said as they walked, his breath pluming white, "mercy will kill you faster than the wind. Remember that." Grace didn't respond, but she kept moving. That was enough. They climbed for another hour. The storm was breaking. Clouds thinned, stars appeared in rents in the sky. A waning moon cast everything in silver and shadow. That's when Wade saw them, in the snow at their feet. Boot prints, small, child-sized, a size 2 at most. The prints were irregular, 1 foot dragging, a trail showing someone crawling, not walking. The marks were fresh, powder snow hadn't filled them yet. Made within the last few hours. Wade knelt, examined them with the eye of a man who'd tracked game and men for 3 decades. "He's hurt," Wade said quietly. "Right leg injured. He's been crawling, moving slow." Grace fell to her knees, touched the prints with trembling fingers. "Samuel," she breathed. Then Wade saw the other tracks, running parallel, 4 inches across, 4 distinct pad marks, claws visible at the front of each toe print. Mountain lion, female probably, around 140 pounds based on the depth and spacing. "Grace," Wade said carefully, "stand up." She heard something in his voice, looked at the second set of tracks. Understanding dawned with horror. "No, he's alive," Wade said. "These prints are 3 hours old at most, but he's being hunted." "By what?" Wade's face was grim. "Cougar, starving from winter. She's following him, waiting for him to get weaker." Grace stood, her eyes wild. "We have to find him. Now." "We will, but we have to be smart. Cats are patient. They don't rush. We rush, we die too." He was about to say more when the sound reached them, carried on the wind, low, guttural. The sound of a predator that had found prey. A growl, maybe 100 yards ahead. Wade chambered around in the Winchester. The metallic click-clack was loud in the frozen silence. "Stay behind me," he ordered. "If I say run, you run. Don't think, don't look back. Just run." They moved toward the sound. Wade's every sense was electric. Finger on the trigger, eyes scanning the shadows where trees became darkness. The growl came again. Closer, 60 yards, 50. Then Grace saw it first. Pointed with a shaking hand. Ahead, at the bottom of a ravine, where a frozen creek cut through the landscape. A small shape, huddled beneath the exposed roots of a fallen oak. A child, motionless, dressed in rags, curled tight against the cold. And 10 feet away, crouched, muscles bunching, a mountain lion, gaunt, ribs visible through tawny fur, eyes reflecting the moonlight like coins. The cat's tail twitched, the universal sign, the moment before the spring. Grace screamed, "Samuel!" The cougar's head snapped toward them. For 1 crystalline second, the world held its breath. Then Wade pulled the trigger. The mountain exploded with sound and fury. And in a cabin 30 years later, Wade Cooper paused his story, looked at his grandson. The boy's eyes were wide, transfixed. "Did you save him?" James whispered. "Did Samuel live?" Wade's old eyes glinted in the firelight. "That boy is where the story gets interesting. Pour me some coffee. This next part needs strength to tell." Outside the 1917 cabin, snow continued to fall. The same snow that had fallen 30 years before. The same mountains, the same cold. But the man telling the story had been changed by fire and ice and the impossible choices that turned boys into men. James poured coffee with shaking hands. Wade lifted the cup, stared into its dark surface, and continued. The Winchester bucked against Wade's shoulder. The sound of the shot was a physical thing rolling across the frozen landscape like thunder. The 44-40 round traveled at 1,300 feet per second. At 35 yards, it covered the distance in less time than a heartbeat. Wade didn't aim for the cougar's head. Skulls deflected bullets, especially at angles, especially on cats. Instead, he aimed for the shoulder, the boiler room, where the bullet would punch through muscle and bone and vital organs and stop the threat before the spring. The mountain lion screamed. The sound was eerily human, a shriek of shock and pain and primal rage. The animal spun in midair, twisting to bite at its own flank where the bullet had struck. Hit the ground, thrashed once, twice, then lay still. Blood spread dark across white snow. Grace was already moving, sliding down the embankment toward the fallen oak, toward the small bundle of rags huddled beneath its roots. Samuel, her voice cracked, raw with desperate hope and terrible fear. Samuel, baby, please. Wade kept the Winchester trained on the tree line, scanned for movement, for threats. Cougars were solitary hunters, but he'd been wrong before. Cost of assumptions was death. He approached the dead cat carefully, kicked it once, hard. No response. The glassy eyes stared at nothing. Wade knelt, checked the entry wound, clean shot, straight through the shoulder into the heart and lungs. The animal had been dead before it hit the ground. 140 pounds of muscle and fang and claw, starving, desperate. In another 30 seconds, it would have killed a 6-year-old boy. Wade turned toward Grace. She was on her knees in the snow, pulling the small form into her lap. The child was blue, his eyes frozen shut with rime ice. He wore what had once been a coat but was now little more than rags. One boot was missing. His exposed foot was black with frostbite. Is he breathing? Wade called, moving closer but still watching their perimeter. Grace pressed her ear to the boy's chest. Her own breathing stopped as she listened. Seconds stretched. 5, 10, 15. Then she gasped. Yes, faint, but yes. Wade knelt beside them, stripped off his glove with his teeth, pressed 2 fingers to the child's carotid artery, felt for the pulse. It was there. Thread thin, erratic, maybe 40 beats per minute. A normal child Samuel's age should be 90 to 110. Stage 3 hypothermia, Wade said. His voice was clinical, detached, the voice of a man who'd pulled frozen men from rivers during his martial days. Maybe worse. Core temperature probably mid-80s. We've got minutes, not hours. He looked at Samuel's exposed foot. The toes were hard, waxy, definitely frostbite, probably 2nd degree, maybe 3rd. The boy would lose toes, maybe the whole foot if they didn't act fast. Fire, Wade said. Now. He didn't wait for wood. Pulled his knife, slashed the lining of his wool jacket. Inside was cotton batting for insulation, dry. Perfect kindling. He gathered what twigs he could find with numb fingers, arranged them in a crude teepee, shielded the pile with his body against the wind. He pulled a match tin from his pocket. 5 matches left. His hands shook from cold. The first match broke as he tried to strike it. The second hissed and died too damp from condensation. The third caught, a tiny flame fragile as hope. Wade cupped it, touched it to the cotton batting. The material caught. Orange flame bloomed. He fed it carefully. Twigs, then larger branches. Within 2 minutes, a fire crackled in the shelter of the creek bank. Bring him close, Wade ordered. Not too close. Rapid rewarming causes shock. Could kill him as sure as the cold. Grace positioned herself and Samuel near the flames. Wade began stripping the boy's wet, frozen clothes. The fabric cracked as he peeled it away. Underneath, Samuel's skin was mottled, purple and white in patches, the pattern of severe hypothermia. Wade wrapped the child in the buffalo coat Grace had been wearing. The coat was still warm from her body heat. He pressed Samuel against Grace's chest. Skin-to-skin contact, the most effective way to transfer warmth. Hold him, Wade said. Talk to him. Make him fight. Grace clutched her son, rocked him. Her lips moved in prayer or pleading or both. Come on, baby, she whispered. Come back to me. Please, Samuel. Please. Wade moved away, drew his knife again, approached the dead cougar. They needed food, needed the pelt. In these mountains, you wasted nothing. Death fed life. That was the way. He began skinning the animal with practiced efficiency. The knife moved in long, smooth strokes, separating hide from flesh. Blood steamed in the cold air. The work was grim but necessary. They'd need protein, need warmth. The cat had tried to kill Samuel. Now it would help save him. Wade was halfway through when he heard it. A small sound, barely audible over the crackling fire. A cough. He turned. Samuel's eyes had opened, just slits, but open. The irises were the same piercing green as his mother's. Mama, the word was barely a whisper, cracked and dry. Grace's face crumpled. Tears froze on her cheeks as they fell. I'm here, baby. I'm here. I hid. Samuel's voice was so small, so brave. Like you said, I hid from the bad men. You did good. Grace sobbed. You did so good. Wade stood, walked over, knelt beside them, looked at the boy's face. 6 years old. Should be playing with wooden soldiers or helping with chores, not fleeing through a blizzard, not marked for death by a madman who thought he was God. You're a brave kid, Wade said. His voice was rough. Braver than most grown men I know. Samuel's eyes found Wade's. Fear flickered there. This strange man with blood on his hands and a face carved from stone. Who is he? Samuel asked his mother. Grace looked at Wade. Her eyes shone with gratitude and something else. Something Wade hadn't seen directed at him in 10 years. Trust. He's the reason we're alive, she said softly. Wade stood, turned back to his work, uncomfortable with the emotion, with the connection. He was a ghost, a shadow, a man who lived alone because everyone he'd ever cared for had burned. But as he finished skinning the cougar, as he cut strips of meat and skewered them on green willow branches to roast over the fire, Wade felt something shift. Some wall inside him, 10 years thick, developed a crack. They ate in silence. The meat was tough, gamey, but it was protein and fat and warmth. Samuel managed a few bites before exhaustion took him. He slept against his mother, breathing easier now, color returning to his face. Wade banked the fire, kept it low. Smoke could be seen for miles. They'd already announced their position with the gunshot. No need to send up a beacon. We need to move, Wade said. That shot carried. Anyone within 2 miles heard it. Where? Grace asked. She looked exhausted, pushed past all reasonable limits of endurance. There's an old logger's cabin on Ironwood Ridge, 5 miles south by southwest, built over the river, defensible. We rest there, get warm, then we walk to Fort Benton. How far? 150 miles, 2 weeks on foot if the weather holds. And then, Wade met her eyes. Then you give that ledger to people who can use it. Federal marshals I trust. They'll protect you. Start new lives somewhere Caleb can't reach. What about you? I'll do what I should have done 10 years ago. Finish what I started in Kansas. Before Grace could respond, Wade held up his hand, listened. His eyes narrowed. Sound carried strangely in the mountains, bounced off canyon walls, distorted by wind and distance. But Wade had lived here long enough to know the difference between natural sounds and man-made ones. What he heard now was the latter, the crunch of snow, rhythmic, heavy, multiple sources, getting closer. They're here, Wade said quietly. He kicked snow over the fire. The flames died in a hiss of steam. Darkness rushed in to fill the space where light had been. The moon was setting. Dawn was still an hour away, the darkest part of night. Wade grabbed his Winchester, checked the load. 3 rounds left in the tube. He'd fired twice at the cabin, once at the riders, once at the cougar, had started with 14, now had 3. His Colt held 6. His boot knife was always ready. Against how many 4 riders initially? 1 dead in the bear trap. That left 3, but Wade knew Caleb wouldn't send just 4 men after stolen property this valuable. There would be more. Main force, following the advanced scouts. Can you walk? Wade asked Grace. She nodded, stood on shaking legs. Lifted Samuel. The boy was small for 6, maybe 45 pounds. Grace could carry him for a while. They moved. Wade led them up the far side of the ravine, away from the creek bed, into denser timber. The snow was deep, exhausting, but the trees provided cover. Behind them, voices called out, coordinating, not hiding their presence. Why would they? They had numbers, had weapons, had the advantage. Wade pushed them hard, ignored Grace's labored breathing, ignored the weight of his own exhaustion. Pain was just information. Keep moving or die. Those were the only options. 2. The Devil's Throat. The terrain changed as they climbed. The gentle slope gave way to something steeper, more treacherous. They were entering the approach to Devil's Throat. To their left, the mountain rose in a sheer wall of granite, ancient, unforgiving. Striations in the rock showed layers of geologic time, millions of years compressed into bands of color. To their right, the ground fell away, a void. Darkness so complete it seemed to have substance. The canyon below was 2,000 feet deep. At the bottom, a river raged, too far down to hear. But Wade knew it was there. had seen men fall into that darkness, had heard the screams cut off when they hit water moving fast enough to shatter bones like glass. The path between wall and void was narrow, maybe 4 feet at its widest, tapering to less than 2 feet in places. Ice covered 80% of the surface. Black ice, nearly invisible, deadly. Watch your footing, Wade said. One slip and you won't stop falling until spring. Grace's face was pale in the pre-dawn gloom. There has to be another way. There is. Back down into their guns. This is the only path horses can't follow. On foot, we have a chance. They started across. Wade went first, tested each step before committing weight, his back pressed against the granite wall, moving sideways. Shuffle step. Testing. Moving. Repeat. Behind him, Grace followed. She'd tied Samuel to her back with strips torn from her dress. The boy was awake, silent, his small arms locked around his mother's neck. The wind was ferocious here, channeled by the canyon, accelerated. What had been 30-mile-per-hour gusts in the valley became 60-mile-per-hour blasts trying to peel them off the mountain. Wade felt the force of it, like invisible hands shoving, pulling, testing. They were 50 yards along the ledge when Wade saw it. Ahead, a dark fissure in the granite face, an old mining prospect, abandoned decades ago when the vein played out or the miner fell, or both. There, Wade pointed. Get inside. They scrambled toward the opening. It was maybe 6 feet wide, 20 feet deep. The ceiling was low, barely 5 feet, but it was shelter, a defensible position. Wade positioned Grace and Samuel in the back, drew his Winchester, aimed at the bend in the trail behind them, waited. Minutes passed. The darkness began to gray, dawn approaching. In the growing light, Wade saw him. Nathan Crow. The man appeared at the far end of the ledge, 300 feet away but visible in profile against the sky. He sat his horse at the point where the path narrowed too much for the animal to continue. Casual, confident, like he was out for a morning ride instead of hunting fugitives across a killing field. Crow dismounted, tied his horse, started walking the ledge on foot. No hesitation, no fear. He moved like a man who'd done this 100 times before. Wade sighted down the Winchester's barrel. Range was long for a shot, 300 feet, nearly football field length. The wind was gusting, the light was bad, but Wade had made harder shots. His finger touched the trigger, applied pressure. 2 pounds, 3, then stopped. If he fired now, the others would know their position, would come prepared, armed, ready. Wade had 3 bullets. Against how many unknown number was a bad tactical situation. Better to wait. See what Crow wanted. Information was ammunition too. Crow walked closer, steady, methodical. He carried a Henry rifle, 44 rimfire. Tube held 15 rounds plus 1 in the chamber. Superior firepower to Wade's 3 remaining shots. At 40 yards, Crow stopped, far enough to be out of knife range, close enough to talk without shouting. Cooper, Crow called out. His voice was smooth, almost friendly. I know you're in that hole. Nowhere else to go on this path. Wade didn't answer, kept the rifle trained on Crow's chest. You're making this harder than it needs to be, Crow continued. He pulled out a cigarette, lit it with a match struck on his thumbnail. The casual arrogance of a man who thought he was untouchable. The prophet is a generous man. He wants to offer you a trade. Still, Wade said nothing. I don't trade with devils, Wade finally called back. His voice echoed off the canyon walls. Crow laughed, dry, rasping. Oh, but you will for this. He took a drag on the cigarette, blew smoke into the wind. You think you're saving a helpless girl? Cooper, you think she's just a runaway wife? Wade's finger tightened on the trigger. She didn't just run, Crow shouted. The friendliness dropped from his voice like a shed skin. She stole the ledger of saints. She has the names Cooper, the judges, the senators, the marshals on Gantry's payroll. She has the book that brings the whole New Eden crashing down. Wade glanced back at Grace. She didn't deny it. Her face was set, defiant. Is it true? Wade asked her quietly. Yes, Grace whispered. Crow's voice floated over the wind, dropping an octave. dripping with malice. "She didn't come alone, Cooper. Why don't you ask her about the child?" Wade froze, looked at Grace, at Samuel sleeping against her chest. "What child?" Wade demanded. Grace began to weep, silent tears tracking through the grime on her face. "I didn't have a choice. He was going to take him. Turn him into a soldier." "Where is the boy?" Wade's voice was sharp. "I hid him," Grace choked out. "In the wagon, under the floorboards. When I crashed, I couldn't get him out. The wood was jammed. I tried, Wade. I swear I tried." Wade's mind reeled back. The wagon wreckage. He'd dug Grace out, hadn't checked underneath, assumed the space was empty or filled with supplies. "He's still there?" Wade asked, horror creeping into his voice. "He's dead," Crow shouted from the ledge. His voice carried savage satisfaction. "My men found the wagon, Cooper. The boy is gone, frozen stiff. She left her own son to die to save her miserable skin." Grace grabbed Wade's arm. Her eyes were wild, desperate. "No, he wasn't in the wagon, and when I woke up, the boards were broken from the inside. He walked away. My boy is out here somewhere. Alive." Wade looked from the weeping woman to the laughing man on the ledge. Tried to process. 6-year-old boy, walked away from wagon, into blizzard, alone. The boot prints they'd followed, the drag marks, the cougar tracks. Samuel had escaped, had crawled for hours, had been hunted, and they'd found him. Crow was lying, playing psychological warfare, trying to break them. Wade stepped out onto the ledge, fully exposed himself to Crow's rifle. The tracker looked surprised. "Giving up, old man?" "No," Wade said. His voice was deadly calm. "I'm going to kill you, and then I'm going to make sure that boy stays alive." Crow smiled, yellow teeth showing. "Come Trowan." But Wade didn't shoot at Crow. He raised the Winchester and fired at the massive overhang of snow and ice clinging to the cliff face 500 feet above Crow's head. The cornice, unstable, pregnant with a winter's worth of accumulation, hanging by the physics of temperature and pressure and luck. Wade's bullet punched into the connection point, where snow met rock. For 1 second, nothing happened. Then the mountain groaned. 3. The mountain's judgment, the sound that followed wasn't sound. It was pressure. A physical wave that compressed the air and made Wade's ears pop and his chest tighten. Deep, primal. The voice of the mountain rendered in frequencies below human hearing. Crow looked up. His smile vanished. The cornice cracked, a fracture line racing across 100 feet of snow and ice in less than a second. Then the whole mass came free. 1,000 tons of compacted snow and ice, moving, accelerating. The leading edge of the avalanche hit terminal velocity in 3 seconds, 100 miles per hour. A tidal wave of white concrete that tore ancient pines from their roots like weeds and snapped boulders the size of wagons like chalk. Crow tried to run, took 3 steps back along the ledge before the mountain caught him. The wall of white slammed past the mineshaft entrance. The air pressure was incredible. Wade and Grace were thrown back into the darkness. The sound was the end of the world. A freight train mixed with artillery fire, mixed with the scream of dying gods. 30 seconds. That's how long it lasted. 30 seconds of absolute chaos, then silence. Silence so complete it seemed to have weight. Wade's ears rang, his head pounded. He could taste blood, had bitten his tongue when the pressure wave hit. He struck a match with shaking hands. The flare of light showed the mineshaft entrance was gone, blocked by a wall of packed snow, 20 feet thick, hard as concrete. They were buried alive. "Are we dead?" Grace's voice came from the darkness, thin, terrified. "Not yet," Wade said, "but we will be if we don't dig." They dug for 90 minutes, with bare hands, with pieces of broken timber from the old mine supports, with desperation. Wade's fingers bled, his nails tore. Grace's hands were worse, shredded, raw. But she didn't stop, couldn't. Samuel was with her. If she stopped, they all died. Wade's right hand finally punched through, into cold air. Blessed, freezing, beautiful air. They widened the hole, crawled out onto a landscape transformed. The ledge was gone, buried under 50 feet of debris. The trees below, the path they'd climbed, all erased, smoothed over like a blank page. The sun was rising, pink and gold against the eastern peaks. The avalanche debris stretched for half a mile down the canyon. A river of destruction frozen mid-flow. Crow, Grace asked. Wade scanned the field of white, no bodies visible, either buried under the slide or swept off the cliff. Either way, Nathan Crow was answering to a higher judge now. Gone, Wade said simply. He looked at Grace, at Samuel. Both were at the absolute edge of survival. Hypothermia, exhaustion, dehydration, shock. In another hour, maybe two, they'd simply lie down and not get up. But they'd bought time. The avalanche would delay pursuit, force Caleb's main group to find another route, give them maybe 4 hours head start. 4 hours to find Samuel's Bryce trail again, to confirm he was the same boy, to reach shelter before their bodies gave out. Wade, oriented by the sun, checked his internal map built from a decade of wandering these mountains. The wagon crash site was east. If Samuel had crawled from there, the wind would have pushed him toward the timberline, away from the cliff, toward the creek bed where they'd found him. Can you walk? Wade asked Grace. She nodded, lifted Samuel again. The boy was awake, watching Wade with those green eyes, old eyes in a young face, eyes that had seen too much. They descended the mountain, skirted the avalanche debris. It was brutal work. The snow was deeper here, disturbed by the slide, unstable. Every step was a gamble. An hour passed, the sun climbed higher. Temperature rose from 20 below to maybe 10 below. Warm by mountain standards, dangerous for a different reason. Warming snow meant more avalanche risk, meant the mountain was unstable. Angry, Wade stopped suddenly, held up his hand. What? Grace whispered. Sign. Wade pointed. In the lee of a massive spruce, the snow was disturbed, not by wind, not by falling debris, by something smaller, more deliberate. Boot prints, small, child-sized, and drag marks, like something heavy being pulled. Samuel's? Grace asked. Her voice broke on the name. Wade knelt, examined the tracks with the eye of a man who'd tracked everything from deer to deserters. The prints were fresh, made within the last few hours. The depth suggested a child around 40 to 50 pounds. The pattern showed injury, right foot dragging, left foot bearing most of the weight. Yes, Wade confirmed. He touched the snow. Still soft, not frozen. He was here maybe 3 hours ago, moving toward the creek. Grace fell to her knees, touched the prints like they were sacred relics. Then Wade saw the other tracks, running parallel to the boot prints, 4 inches wide, 4 distinct pads, claws visible. Mountain lion. His jaw clenched. He didn't tell Grace, not yet, but his hand went to the Winchester, checked the load by feel. 2 rounds left. He'd used 1 on the avalanche, 2 bullets. 1 for the cat if it came to that, 1 for whatever came after. They followed the trail. It led them down into a ravine, toward a frozen creek. The tracks grew fresher, more recent. The cat's prints moved closer to the boys, converging. That's when Wade heard it, the low guttural sound that made his blood run cold. A snarl, the sound of a predator that had found prey. He broke into a run. The second chance. Wade crested the small rise above the creek bed and his heart stopped. The scene below could have been painted, frozen in a moment of perfect horror. A fallen oak roots exposed, creating a cage-like shelter. Inside, a small figure in rags, motionless, blue. Outside, 10 feet away, a mountain lion, gaunt, desperate, muscles bunched beneath tawny fur, tail twitching. The universal sign, 2 seconds from the killing spring. Grace screamed behind him. Samuel! The cat's head snapped toward them. Wade didn't hesitate, didn't think, didn't calculate wind or range or angle. Raised the Winchester, found the shoulder in his sights, squeezed. The world exploded with sound and consequence. Everything that followed happened in the firelit cabin. The rescue, the fire, the meat, Samuel waking, speaking, surviving, Grace holding her son, Wade finishing the story he'd started to tell his grandson. You saved him, James breathed, 17 years old and transported by the tail. You killed the cat. I did, Wade confirmed. Old now, tired, but the memory burned bright. And for about 10 minutes, I thought maybe that was enough. Maybe we'd won. Maybe joy or fate or dumb luck had given us a chance. He paused, sipped cold coffee. But the mountain wasn't done with us yet, V. Caleb's arrival, Wade had just finished skinning the cougar when he heard it. A sound that made every nerve in his body scream danger. Silence. The wind had died, the birds had stopped. Even the creek seemed to hold its breath. Nature going quiet when predators approached. Wade's hand went to the Winchester. He stood slowly, canned the tree line. "What is it?" Grace asked. She was still holding Samuel. The boy was eating small pieces of cooked meat, getting color back. "Listen," Wade said. Grace fell silent, strained to hear. Then her eyes widened. "I don't hear anything." "Exactly." Wade kicked snow over the fire, doused it completely. Smoke could be seen for miles, could draw attention they couldn't afford. He was reaching for Grace when he saw it. On the ridge above them, 300 yards out, silhouetted against the rising sun, a horse, a man on horseback. But not just any man. This one sat perfectly straight, perfectly still, like a statue carved from shadow. He wore a white hat, wide-brimmed, pristine despite the wilderness, a long duster coat that fell to his stirrups, and in his hands held like a talisman, a book, a Bible. "Caleb Thorne," Wade breathed. Grace's reaction was immediate, visceral. She clutched Samuel so tight the boy whimpered. Her face drained of all color. Her whole body began to shake. "No," she whispered. "Please, God, no. Not him. Anyone but him." Wade understood. This wasn't fear of violence. This was something deeper. Primal. The terror of prey that knows the predator. That has felt its teeth. Behind Caleb, riders emerged from the timber. 1, 18, 10, 15, 20, 20 armed men, lining the ridge like crows on a fence, each one carrying a rifle, each one wearing a white sash across their chest, the uniform of the sanctified. Wade did the math. Winchester 1 round, Colt 6 rounds, boot knife, against 20 rifles with maybe 300 rounds total. They were in a creek bed, natural kill box. Steep banks on both sides, open ground behind, boxed in. "We're dead," Grace said flatly. "Not yet," Wade replied, but even he didn't believe it. Caleb's voice carried across the distance. Melodic, warm, the voice of a preacher comfortable at a pulpit, which made it terrifying. Wade Cooper. The name echoed off the canyon walls. I wondered what manner of man could kill my best lieutenant. I should have known it was the ghost of Kansas. Wade grabbed Grace and Samuel, shoved them behind the oak roots, leveled his rifle at the ridge. "Go to hell, Caleb," he shouted back. Caleb's laugh was gentle, benevolent, like he was dealing with a wayward child. "I'm trying to save you from it, brother. You have something that belongs to me. 2 things, actually." "They're not things," Wade growled. "They're people. Flesh is fleeting, Wade. The soul is eternal. And the soul of that woman and that boy belongs to the church of the sanctified." Caleb closed the Bible, handed it to the rider beside him, made a signal with his hand. 3 riders started down the slope. Wade waited until they were halfway, 40 yards, close enough. He didn't shoot the men. He shot the lead horse. The animal screamed, went down hard, tumbled forward, threw its rider, created a domino effect that turned the slope into a chaos of thrashing hooves and panicked men. "Run!" Wade roared at Grace. But she didn't run away from the horses. She ran toward them, exactly as Wade had instructed. The last thing they'd expect. Trying to spook the animals. Create more case, buy seconds. Wade dropped to one knee, cycled the Winchester's lever. Click, clack, empty. He was out of ammunition. Wade threw the rifle aside, drew his Colt. 6 rounds, 20 targets. He fired at the ridge. Not aim shots, suppression fire. Keep their heads down, give Grace time. Bang. A rider grabbed his chest, fell. Bang. Another's hat flew off. Bang. A horse reared, throwing its rider. 3 shots gone. 3 left. Then Caleb raised his hand. The world erupted. 17 rifles opened fire simultaneously. The sound was apocalyptic. The air filled with lead. Dirt and snow and wood exploded around Wade. He felt impacts, pressure, heat. A bullet hammered into his left shoulder. The force spun him completely around. His arm went numb instantly. The Colt flew from his hand. Another round grazed his thigh, opened a furrow 6 inches long. Blood poured hot down his leg. Wade went down, face first into the snow. His vision grayed at the edges. Shock setting in. Blood loss, hypothermia, everything hitting at once. He tried to reach for his boot knife. His arm wouldn't obey, couldn't feel his fingers, couldn't feel anything below his neck except pain. "Stop," Grace's voice cut through the gunfire. "Stop it, I surrender, just stop." The shooting ceased instantly. Wade lay in the red snow, couldn't move, could barely breathe. Watched helplessly as Caleb rode down the slope, his horse stepping delicately over bodies, over blood, over the wreckage of Wade's last stand. Caleb stopped in front of Grace, looked down at her with infinite disappointment, like a father with a wayward daughter. "Oh, Grace," he sighed, "my little songbird. Why must you make things so difficult?" "Let him go," Grace pleaded. Tears froze on her cheeks as they fell. "He has nothing to do with this. I have the book. I have Samuel. Just let him go." Caleb looked over at Wade, studied the bleeding man with cold calculation. "He killed Crow," Caleb said softly. "He killed 6 of my flock today. Justice demands blood." He dismounted, walked over to Wade, towered over the wounded mountain man. His boots were polished, clean, incongruous against the carnage. "Do you remember Wade?" Caleb asked conversationally. "Kansas, 1877. You were stubborn then too." Wade spat blood. "I remember you burning my wife, killing my boy." Caleb shook his head, sad, disappointed. "I saved them, Wade. Sent them to a better place, just as I'm going to save this boy." He turned to Grace, held out his hand. "Give me the book." Grace pulled the leather journal from inside her dress, handed it over with trembling fingers. Caleb checked it, nodded with satisfaction, slid it into his coat pocket. Then he reached out, grabbed Samuel by the collar of the buffalo coat. "No!" Grace shrieked, lunged for him, and a rider stepped forward, backhanded her across the face. The blow knocked her into the snow. Blood poured from her split lip. "Mama!" Samuel screamed, kicking, biting, fighting with everything a 6-year-old had. Caleb held the boy effortlessly at arm's length, studied his face, the green eyes, the jawline, the shape of the nose. "He has your spirit, Grace," Caleb said, "but he has my blood." Wade froze, even through the pain and shock those words penetrated. He looked at Samuel, then at Caleb. The resemblance was there, subtle but undeniable. The eyes, the bone structure, features you could miss if you weren't looking, but once seen, impossible to ignore. "That's right," Caleb said, seeing Wade's realization. "He isn't just a recruit. He is my son, my heir, my blood. And you tried to steal him." He turned to his riders. "Tie the woman to a horse. She walks back to the settlement. If she falls, drag her." "And the mountain man?" a rider asked. Caleb pulled a pearl-handled Colt from his holster. .45 caliber, ornate, beautiful, deadly. He cocked the hammer. The sound was very loud in the sudden silence. He aimed at Wade's head. "Wait," Wade said. His voice was weak. Blood bubbled on his lips, but his eyes were clear, sharp. "You want to be a great Caleb, gods show mercy. You kill me like a boy, you're just a bandit. You leave me here to the mountain. Let the mountain decide. Then your hands are clean." It was a gamble, a desperate appeal to Caleb's massive ego, to his need to see himself as something more than a killer. Caleb paused, the gun still aimed, finger on the trigger. He looked at Wade's shoulder, blood pooling in the snow, looked at the storm clouds gathering again over the peaks. Another blizzard rolling in, temperature already dropping. He smiled. "You're right," Caleb said. "A bullet is too quick for you, too merciful. The mountain has already claimed you." He lowered the gun, holstered it, mounted his horse with Samuel struggling in his arms. "Let the cold have him," Caleb ordered his men. They turned, tied Grace's hands to a saddle horn with rough hemp rope. She stumbled, looked back at Wade one last time. Her eyes screamed everything words couldn't. Apology, gratitude, grief, hope. Then they were gone. disappearing into the timber, taking the only two people Wade had cared about in 10 years. Wade lay alone in the red snow. The cold crept into his limbs, a numbing weight, whispering promises of rest, of sleep, of an end to pain. His hand brushed against something in the snow, a spent shell casing, from his Colt, still warm from firing. He remembered Caleb's words, "He is my son." Wade's jaw clenched, his good hand curled into a fist. "Not today, he whispered to the empty wind. "Not today." He forced his right arm under his chest. The pain was incredible, white-hot, electric. A scream tore from his throat, but he pushed, rose to his hands and knees, swayed, vision swimming with black spots, stood, bleeding, broken, but standing. Wade began to walk, not away from danger, but after it. In the cabin 30 years later, old Wade paused, looked at his grandson. James sat transfixed, eyes wide, hardly breathing. "You followed them," James whispered. "Shot. Alone. No weapons." "You followed," Wade nodded slowly. "Sometimes, boy, a man lives not because he's strong, but because he has a reason to live stronger than his reason to die." He stood, walked to the mantel, took down a small wooden box, opened it. Inside was a tarnished U.S. Marshal badge, a pearl-handled Colt, and a photograph, faded, water-stained, showing three people, a young man, a woman, a small boy. "That's your grandmother," Wade said, pointing to the woman, "and your father," pointing to the boy, "Samuel, on the day we became a family." "But how?" James asked. "How did you survive? How did you save them?" Wade smiled, a sad, distant smile. "That grandson is the third part, the hardest part, the part about when mercy and justice meet, when you have to become something you swore you'd never be again, when you have to walk through fire one more time to pull someone out." Outside, the 1917 snow continued to fall. Inside, the fire burned low. Wade Cooper was leaving a red trail in the snow. Each step was a small war. His left arm hung useless at his side, the shoulder a ruin of torn muscle and shattered bone. The bullet had punched clean through, but the damage was catastrophic. Nerves severed, blood vessels opened. The cold was his only ally, now freezing the wound partially shut, slowing the bleeding enough that he might have hours instead of minutes. His thigh burned where the graze had opened flesh. Not deep, not lethal, but painful. A constant reminder that his body was failing, that he was walking on borrowed time. The sun climbed higher. Temperature rose to maybe zero, warm by mountain standards, deadly by any other measure. Wade counted his steps, a trick from his martial days. When you focused on numbers, you couldn't focus on pain, couldn't acknowledge the voice in your head saying, "Lie down, rest, sleep, let the mountain take you." 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 steps. He wasn't tracking by sight anymore. The blood loss made his vision swim, made the world tilt and blur at the edges. But he knew these mountains, had walked them for 10 years, knew where a man like Caleb Thorne would go. The Ironwood logging mill, built 20 years ago during the timber boom, abandoned when the easy wood ran out and the company moved north. A skeleton of rotting timber perched over the river. The building sagged like a dying man, but it had walls, a roof, stoves for warmth, perfect for a cult needing shelter, perfect for a madman playing God. Wade had been there once, 5 years back, checking it as potential winter shelter. Decided against it. Too visible, too accessible, too many ghosts in the rusted machinery. Now those ghosts would serve a different purpose. At step 4,000, Wade's boot found ice. He went down, hard. The impact drove the air from his lungs. Pain exploded through his shoulder like lightning. He lay gasping, staring at the gray sky. This would be so easy, to just close his eyes, to let the cold take him, to finally see Margaret again, to hold Thomas, to ask their forgiveness for failing them. His hand touched something in the snow beside him. Metal, cold, a shell casing from the fight at the creek bed must have fallen from his pocket during the struggle. Wade stared at it. This small brass cylinder, spent, empty, useless, except it had saved Samuel's life. That bullet, fired into the cougar's shoulder, had kept a 6-year-old boy from being torn apart. And that boy was Caleb's son, had Caleb's blood, but wasn't Caleb, wasn't evil, was just a child, innocent, deserving of a chance, the same chance Wade's son never got. Thomas, Wade whispered to the empty sky, I couldn't save you, but maybe I can save him. Maybe that's enough. Maybe that balances the scales. He rolled onto his right side, used his good arm to push himself up. The world spun. Black spots danced at the edges of his vision. But he stood, started walking again. Step 4001. The forest began to thin. Wade smelled smoke. Wood smoke mixed with something else. Incense, maybe. The sickly, sweet smell of ceremony, of ritual. He dropped low, moved tree to tree, his martial training kicking in despite the blood loss, despite the pain. Some skills never left you. Through the pines, the mill materialized, a jagged silhouette against the mountains, 3 stories of weathered timber. The water wheel still visible where the building straddled the river. Frozen now, silent, but the gears were there. Rusted, deadly. 20 horses stood in a makeshift corral, guards posted at intervals. But they were watching the approaches, the trails, not expecting anyone to come from the deep timber, from the impossible direction. Wade circled wide, came at the mill from the blind side, where the river cut close and the rocks provided cover. His body was shutting down. He could feel it. Hypothermia stage 2, maybe 3, core temperature dropping, extremities numb, decision-making impaired. He had maybe 30 minutes of function left, maybe less, had to make them count. Wade reached the mill's edge, found the old maintenance ladder, rusted iron rungs leading to the upper floor. He tested the first rung. It held, barely. He began to climb, one-handed, using his legs to push, his shoulders screaming with every movement, blood running down his arm, dripping into the snow below. At the top, Wade pulled himself onto a catwalk. The wood groaned under his weight and rotted through in places, but it led to the rafters, to a position above the main floor. He crawled forward on his belly, reached the edge, looked down. 2. The prophet's altar. The scene below was madness dressed as ceremony. The main floor had been cleared. A platform erected at the center, crude, makeshift, but functional. On it stood Caleb Thorne, still wearing his white hat, his duster, but now he'd added vestments, a purple robe, stolen from some church probably, desecrated, repurposed for his twisted theology. Around him, his 20 followers formed a circle, the sanctified riders. Each wore their white sash, each held a rifle, but the weapons were grounded, butts resting on the floor, muzzles pointed at the ceiling. At parade rest, they were chanting, low, rhythmic, words Wade didn't recognize. Maybe Latin, maybe something Caleb invented. It didn't matter. The effect was the same, hypnotic, unsettling. Against a support beam, Grace was tied, rope around her wrists, around her waist, binding her upright. Her dress was soaked. They dumped water on her, winter water, ice cold, to break her, to remind her of her powerlessness. Her face was swollen, bruised. They'd beaten her, but her eyes were still defiant, still burning with that hate Wade had seen before. At Caleb's feet, small and terrified, sat Samuel. The boy was shaking, crying silently. Tears tracked through the dirt on his face. He wore only a thin shirt. They'd stripped him to the waist, exposed his small chest. And in Caleb's hand, pulled from the potbelly stove that roared behind him, was a branding iron. The tip glowed cherry red. The metal was shaped into that familiar symbol. Circle, vertical line, lightning bolt, the mark of the prophet. Tonight, Caleb's voice boomed, practiced, theatrical, the voice of a man who loved his own words. We strip away the weakness of the mother. Tonight, the boy receives the mark, the seal of the sanctified, the promise of his destiny. One of the riders stepped forward, held the iron steady while Caleb examined it, nodded. From this moment, Caleb continued, Samuel Thorne shall be reborn, no longer a child of woman, but a soldier of Ba, marked, chosen, purified. Grace screamed, strained against her bonds. No, Caleb, please. He's your son, your blood. Caleb turned to her. His face was ecstatic, transported, a man who truly believed his own insanity. Pain brings clarity, Grace. Suffering purifies the soul. I suffered when I lost my first family, when plague took them, when God tested me. Now I test my son, as Abraham tested Isaac, as God demands. He grabbed Samuel's collar, pulled the boy forward. Samuel struggled, kicked, bit. But Caleb was too strong. He held the child with one hand, raised the branding iron with the other, positioned it inches from Samuel's chest. The boy could feel the heat, started screaming, high-pitched, terrified. The sound of a child who knew pain was coming and couldn't escape it. High above in the rafters, Wade rested his remaining strength against the catwalk railing. He'd lost too much blood, could barely focus. The scene below swam and doubled. He had no gun. The Colt was somewhere in the snow at the creek bed, the Winchester empty, thrown aside. All he had was his boot knife, 12 inches of steel, good for close work, useless at this range. But he had something else, something the mill provided. Directly above the stove, suspended from the rafters by ancient rope, hung a massive iron counterweight, part of the original mill machinery, used to lift loads, to operate the water wheel. 1,000 pounds of cast iron, rusted, neglected, held by rope that should have been replaced decades ago. Wade pulled the knife, began sawing at his belt, cutting free the leather. His hands shook. The knife slipped twice, but he got it free. Made a crude sling, tied one end to the knife handle, the other to the catwalk railing. It was a terrible plan, desperate, with almost no chance of success, but it was all he had. Josiah, Wade's voice thundered from the darkness above. The effect was electric. Every head snapped up. The chanting stopped. Caleb froze the branding iron still poised above Samuel's chest. "Who speaks?" Caleb demanded. His voice had lost its theatrical quality. Now it was sharp, dangerous. The voice of a man who didn't like surprises. "The mountain," Wade said. His voice was weak, fading, but it carried in the sudden silence. Caleb's eyes scanned the rafters, searching shadows. "Show yourself, Spectre." Wade didn't show himself. Instead, he threw the knife, not at Caleb, not at the riders, at the rope holding the counterweight. The blade tumbled end over end. The throw was weak, off balance. Wade's shoulder was destroyed, his aim compromised. But the knife was sharp, and the rope was old. The blade caught the hemp, bit through half the fibers. The rope groaned, began to fray. No, Caleb saw it, understood in that split second what was about to happen. The counterweight fell. 3. The wrath of iron. The 1,000 pounds of cast iron plummeted 12 feet in less than a second, accelerating, building momentum, building destructive force. It hit the potbelly stove dead center. The impact was catastrophic. The cast iron stove, designed to withstand heat, not impact, shattered like pottery. Pieces of metal flew in every direction. Shrapnel traveling at lethal velocity. But worse was what came from inside. The stove had been burning hot for hours. Coals glowed white. Temperature inside was probably 800 degrees. When the stove ruptured, those coals exploded outward. A shotgun blast of burning ember and ash in superheated air. The dry timber floor caught instantly. Decades-old pine, dry as paper, soaked in sawdust and oil. Perfect fuel. Flames raced across the floor, up the walls, into the rafters. In 5 seconds, the mill went from ceremony to inferno. Chaos erupted. The sanctified riders broke formation. Some ran for the doors. Some tried to beat out flames. Some just stood frozen, trapped by indecision. In the confusion, Wade dropped from the catwalk, landed hard on the platform. His legs buckled. The impact drove pain through his body like a spear, but he forced himself up. Through the smoke, he saw Grace, still tied to the beam. Flames climbing the wood behind her. Wade stumbled forward. Drew his boot knife. The blade he'd thrown had been his spare. This was the real one, the one he'd carried for 20 years. He cut Grace's bonds. The rope parted. She fell forward into his arms. Samuel, she screamed. Where's Samuel? Wade looked. The boy was gone. Caleb had him, was backing toward the rear of the mill, away from the flames, toward what looked like a cargo door. Get out! Wade shoved Grace toward the nearest exit. Back door run. I'm not leaving without my son. I'll get him. Go! Grace hesitated. Then the roof groaned. A support beam cracked, made her decision. She ran. Wade turned, faced Caleb across 20 feet of burning floor. The prophet stood with Samuel clutched in one arm. In his other hand he'd drawn the pearl-handled Colt. .45 caliber, ornate grip, hammer cocked. He is mine, Caleb shrieked. His face was twisted. Mask of rage and righteousness melted together. The prophecy is written. He is my heir, my blood, my legacy. Wade stepped through the fire. His clothes were smoking, his face blistered from heat, but he kept walking. Prophecy's over, Caleb. Caleb aimed the Colt at Wade's head. Center mass, point-blank range. Even a madman couldn't miss. He pulled the trigger. Click. The hammer fell on an empty chamber. Caleb's face went white. He stared at the gun, couldn't comprehend. He cocked it again. Click. Misfire. The percussion cap wet or damaged. Powder compromised. Maybe from the river crossing. Maybe from condensation. Maybe from divine intervention. Wade didn't care which. Guess your God disagrees, he said. He didn't use his knife. Didn't need to. Instead, he slammed his good shoulder into Caleb's chest, drove the preacher backward with all his remaining strength. Caleb stumbled. His boots slipped on scattered coals. He fell hard against the shattered remains of the stove, cried out as red-hot metal seared through his vestments. Through his skin, he dropped Samuel. The boy scrambled away, toward the door, toward freedom. Caleb writhed, tried to push himself up. The fire was spreading, consuming, the temperature rising by the second. Wade, he looked up, eyes wild. Wait, I can give you anything, redemption, salvation. A place in the new kingdom. Wade knelt, brought his face close to Caleb's, close enough to see the fear. The sudden realization that mortality applied even to self-proclaimed prophets. I already have salvation, Wade said quietly. He looked toward the door where Grace and Samuel waited. You have a date with the devil. He stood, kicked the broken support strut next to Caleb's head. The rotten floor gave way. Caleb's scream cut off as he fell into the darkness below, into the machinery, into the frozen gears of the water wheel. There was a wet crunch, then silence. Wade, Grace's voice from the door. The roof, Wade looked up. The ceiling was coming down, support beams giving way, burning timber falling like rain. He ran, or tried to. His body had nothing left. He stumbled, fell, couldn't get up. Grace was there. How she got back inside, Wade didn't know. But she grabbed his good arm, pulled. Samuel was on his other side, the boy's small hands gripping Wade's coat. Together they dragged him toward the door. A beam fell, missed Wade's head by inches, exploded into sparks and flame. They burst out into the night, into clean air, into snow and cold and blessed darkness. Behind them the ironwood mill collapsed, the whole structure folding in on itself, sending a pillar of sparks hundreds of feet into the sky. The sound was apocalyptic, the death rattle of a building and the evil it contained. Wade fell to his knees in the snow. His vision was fading, darkness creeping in from the edges. He'd pushed too far, lost too much blood, done too much with a body that should have died hours ago. Wade, Grace's face appeared above him, blurred, distant. Stay with me. Don't you dare die now. The boy, Wade managed. His voice was barely a whisper. Safe. He's safe. You saved him. You saved us both. Wade smiled, or tried to. Good. That's good. The darkness took him. The price of justice. Wade woke 3 days later. The first thing he felt was warmth. Real warmth. Not the fever heat of hypothermia or the searing pain of fire, but the gentle warmth of a properly heated room, a fireplace, blankets. The second thing he felt was pain. His shoulder throbbed, deep, constant. The kind of pain that spoke of serious damage, permanent damage. He opened his eyes, found himself in a small cabin. Not his burned cabin. Somewhere else. The walls were closer, the ceiling lower, a logger's shelter maybe. Grace sat beside the bed. She looked exhausted. Dark circles under her eyes, hair tangled, but alive, whole. "You're awake," she said. Her voice cracked. "I thought you were going to die. You were delirious for 3 days. Fever, infection. I didn't know what to do." Wade's throat was dry, raw. Water. She held a cup to his lips. He drank. The water was cold, tasted like melted snow, like life. "Where are we?" he asked when he could speak. "Old Logger's cabin, 5 miles from the mill. I carried you here. Well dragged mostly. Samuel helped." The boy sleeping. Grace pointed to the corner. Samuel was curled under blankets, small, peaceful, alive. The others, Caleb's men, scattered. When the mill collapsed, they ran. Some went south, some east. Without Caleb, they're just lost sheep. Wade tried to sit up. Pain lanced through his shoulder. He gasped, fell back. "Don't," Grace said. "You're hurt bad. The bullet went clean through, but it destroyed everything, muscle, tendon, nerves. Your left arm is going to be limited. Forever." Wade processed that. His gun arm was his right. His left had been for steadying, for leverage. He'd lost function, but not lethality. Could live with that. "The ledger," he said. "You still have it." Grace pulled it from her coat. The leather was water-stained, smoke-damaged, but intact. "Yes." "Good. We need to get it to the right people." "I've been thinking about that." Grace's hands tightened on the book. "What if we just destroyed it? Burned it? Started fresh? No trials, no testimony, no reliving everything?" Wade looked at her, understood the temptation. To put it all behind them, pretend it never happened, move on. But he'd tried that 10 years ago, buried his past, changed his name, hid in the mountains, and the past had found him anyway. Always did. "Those names in that book," Wade said slowly, "they enabled Caleb. Judges who dismissed charges, marshals who looked the other way, politicians who protected him. They're guilty too. They need to answer. But if we turn it in Samuel, and I will have to testify, face those men in court, relive everything. Yes, but you'll do it as free people, under protection. And when it's done, Caleb's whole kingdom falls. Every judge, every corrupt official, the whole rotten system." Grace was quiet for a long time, stared at the ledger in her hands. "There's a U.S. Marshal I trust," Wade continued. "Fort Benton, John Beckett, 60 years old, been in the service since before the war. He's honest, one of the few. We get there, we hand this over, he'll do what's right. And then what happens to us? You and Samuel get new names, new lives, federal protection until the trials are done. Then you disappear, somewhere Caleb's remnants can't reach. What about you?" Wade's jaw tightened. "Kansas still has a warrant for me. What I did, even if justified, I'll have to face. Stand trial. For saving people. For killing 6 of Caleb's men in 1877. For the methods I used. For stepping outside the law." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "That's not fair." "Fair doesn't matter. Right does. And right is facing what you've done. Taking responsibility. Even when it costs you." 3 weeks later, they rode into Fort Benton, a military outpost on the Missouri River. Civilization, law, order. Wade led them to the marshal's office, a squat stone building that had weathered a dozen Montana winters. Inside, Marshal John Beckett sat behind a desk covered in paperwork. He looked up as they entered. His eyes widened. "Wade Cooper," he said. "Or should I say Silas Cooper?" "Thought you were dead." "Close enough," Wade replied. "Got something for you, John." He placed the ledger on the desk. Beckett opened it, started reading. His weathered face grew darker with each page. When he reached the protection list, he closed the book, sat back, let out a long breath. "Jesus, Wade, this is half the territorial government." "I know. You realize what this means. The trials alone will take years. Some of these men have power, connections. They'll fight." "I know that too." Beckett looked at Grace and Samuel. Understanding dawned. They'll testify, Grace nodded. Under protection. Done. I'll arrange it immediately. Safe house. Guards. New identities after. And Wade? Grace asked. Her voice was tight. Beckett sighed, pulled a folder from his desk, opened it. Inside was a wanted poster. Silas Cooper, Kansas. Murder. 1877. Kansas wants him. Has for 10 years. I'll have to notify them. Extradition will take time, but it'll happen. What will happen to him? Trial could go either way. Depends on the jury, on the judge, on how well he can explain why he killed those men. Wade stepped forward. I'll go voluntarily. No fight, no flight. I've run long enough. The scales of justice. The trial was held in Topeka, 6 months after the events at Ironwood Mill. Spring had come to Kansas. The fields were green, the air warm. Wade sat in a courtroom wearing borrowed clothes, shackles on his wrists. His left arm was stiff, limited range of motion. Just as Grace had predicted, the prosecutor was young, ambitious, saw Wade as a stepping stone to higher office. He painted Wade as a vigilante, a killer who took the law into his own hands, who murdered 6 men in cold blood. But Wade's lawyer appointed by the court told a different story, told of a marshal pursuing criminals, told of a farmhouse burning, a wife and child dead, told of a man pushed beyond endurance who fought back the only way he could. Grace testified, under oath, told the jury about Caleb Thorne, about the cult, about the women branded and broken, about the officials who enabled it all. The ledger was entered as evidence, the names made public. 3 judges resigned immediately. 2 marshals were arrested. The Montana Territorial Governor's aide fled to Mexico. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The jury deliberated for 2 days. The verdict was not guilty, self-defense, justified use of force in pursuit of criminals. Wade walked out of that courthouse a free man. Grace and Samuel were waiting. They'd stayed through the whole trial, refused protection until they knew Wade's fate. It's over, Wade said simply. Grace smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. What now? Now we go home. Where's home? Wade looked north, toward the mountains, toward Montana, toward the high country where he'd spent a decade running from his past. I know a place, good timber, good water, view that'll steal your breath. We could build something there, something real, something that lasts. We, Grace asked softly. Wade looked at her, at Samuel, at these 2 people he'd saved, who'd saved him in return. If you'll have me, not as a husband, not as a father, those roles belong to other people, better people, but as family, as someone who'll protect you, teach the boy, help you both have the life Caleb stole. Grace took his hand, the damaged one, the one that would never fully heal. Yes, she said, we'll have you. 6. Legacy. 6 months after the trial, September 1888, Wade stood on a hillside in the Bitterroot Mountains. Different location from his old cabin. Higher, more remote, but beautiful. Aspen trees turning gold, creek running clear. Behind him a new cabin rose. Proper construction this time. Help from the neighboring ranchers who'd heard his story, respected his stand. Grace stood on the porch, wearing a simple dress, her hair tied back, the brand on her neck covered by a high collar. Some scars you wore, some you hid. Both were valid. Samuel played by the creek, chasing frogs, laughing. The sound of a child allowed to be a child. No more running, no more fear, just the simple joy of a Montana summer turning to fall. Dusty the mule grazed nearby. 12 years old now, still stubborn, still reliable. Wade had his Winchester, a new one, model 1886, .45-70 caliber. More powerful than the old .73. The old rifle had burned in his cabin. This one was a gift from Marshal Beckett at Doan for services rendered. Wade, Samuel called, come see, I caught a big one. Wade smiled, a real smile, not the ghost of one, not the memory of happiness, but actual joy. He walked down to the creek, knelt beside the boy, looked at the frog cupped in small hands. That's a good one, Wade said. Bullfrog. See the size of those back legs, he can jump 10 feet easy. Can we keep him? Frogs don't like being kept, they like being free. But we can watch him, learn from him, then let him go. Samuel considered this, nodded, set the frog down. It sat for a moment, then launched itself into the creek with a splash. The boy laughed, pure, unburdened. Grace joined them, sat beside Wade on the bank. Her hand found his. "You did good," she said quietly. "We did good. All of us." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the water flow, watching Samuel play, watching the sun paint the mountains in shades of amber and rose. "Do you ever regret it?" Grace asked. "Everything you gave up, the solitude, the peace." Wade thought about his old life, the cabin he'd burned, the 10 years alone, the running from ghosts. "No," he said finally. "I thought I wanted peace. Turned out I just wanted purpose. Reason to wake up. Something worth protecting. And now, bitch, now I have it." A hawk cried overhead, circling on thermals, hunting, but not hunting them. They were under the mountain's protection now, part of its story. That evening after Samuel was in bed, Wade and Grace sat by the fireplace. He told her about Thomas, about Margaret, about the farmhouse in Kansas. Told her things he'd never told anyone. The guilt, the failure, the decade of running. Grace listened, didn't judge, didn't comfort with empty words, just listened. When he finished, she said, "You know what I learned from Caleb? What the one good thing to come from all that darkness was, what? That the past doesn't define us, doesn't limit us. We can be broken and still become whole, can fail and still find redemption, can lose everything and still build something beautiful." Wade looked at the fire, at the shadows dancing on the walls. "Wisdom," he said softly. "What?" "Something a wise woman once told me, that we can be broken and still become whole." Grace smiled, rested her head on his shoulder. The damaged one, the one that would never be the same. But then nothing was the same, and that was okay, because different didn't mean lesser. Different could mean better. Epilogue. The Fireside. 1917, in the cabin 30 years later, old Wade finished his story. The fire had burned down to coals. The coffee was cold. James sat transfixed, silent, processing everything his grandfather had told him. "So grandmother was Sister Grace," James said finally. "And dad was Samuel, Caleb Thorne's son." "By blood, yes. By choice, no. Your father chose to be better than his blood, chose to build instead of destroy, to nurture instead of harm. That's what makes a man, not who his father was, but who he chooses to become. And you raised him. We raised him. Grace and me, not as husband and wife. We tried that for a while. Didn't work. Some bonds aren't romantic. They're deeper, forged in fire and ice and blood. We were family. Our family will always be." James looked at the Winchester on the mantel. "The 7 notches, one for each of Caleb's men you killed. No, one for each life saved that day. Grace, Samuel. The other 5 were people who testified at the trials. Used the ledger to bring down the whole corrupt system. Those notches aren't kills. They're victories." "When do I get to carve my notch?" Wade looked at his grandson. 17. About to go to war. About to face things no boy should face. You'll carve it when you save a life, not take one. Remember that in France, the measure of a man isn't the enemies he kills. It's the friends he brings home. James nodded, the weight of that wisdom settling on young shoulders. Wade stood, walked to the window. Outside, the snow had stopped. Stars appeared through breaking clouds, the same stars that had shone 30 years ago, the same mountains, the same cold. But he was different, warmer, fuller, complete in ways his younger self could never have imagined. A knock at the door. Wade opened it. Grace stood there, 73 years old, gray hair, lines around her eyes. But those eyes still green, still fierce, still beautiful. "Done filling the boy's head with stories?" she asked. "Just telling him the truth." "The truth is complicated." "Truth usually is." She stepped inside, looked at James. "Your grandfather makes it sound heroic. It wasn't. It was terrifying, painful. We nearly died a dozen times. I lost things that can never be recovered. But we gained things that made it worthwhile." "Like what?" James asked. Grace walked to the photograph on the mantel, the one of Wade, herself, and young Samuel. "Like this." like family, like the knowledge that even in the darkest winter, if you keep walking, spring eventually comes. And when it does, you're stronger for the journey. She turned to Wade. Samuel's here, with Martha and the grandchildren. They want to say goodbye before James leaves. The door opened again. Samuel Cooper walked in, 43 years old now, strong, solid, a rancher, a husband, a father. Nothing like the terrified 6-year-old who'd hidden from monsters. He embraced his son, held him tight, then looked at Wade. Tell him, Samuel asked. Wade nodded. Samuel turned to James. Before you go, I want you to understand something. About blood, about legacy, about what makes a man. He pulled up his shirt, exposed his chest. There was no brand, no scar. The mark Caleb had tried to burn into him had never touched skin. Wade had prevented it. Your grandfather saved me from being marked, Samuel said. But more than that, he taught me what mark to carry instead. Not one burned into flesh, but one carved into character. Courage, integrity, sacrifice. Those are the marks that matter. Those are the legacy I pass to you. James nodded, too full of emotion to speak. The family gathered around the fire. 3 generations, bound not by blood alone, but by shared history, by choices made in desperate moments, by the decision to keep walking even when the mountain offered rest. Outside, the Montana night was cold and clear. Inside, warmed by fire and family, Wade Cooper looked at the life he'd built from the ashes of his old one, and knew he'd chosen right. When morning came, James boarded the train east, carried with him his grandfather's Winchester, his father's courage, his grandmother's resilience, and the knowledge that no matter how dark the winter, no matter how cold the night, if you keep walking toward the light, you'll find your way home. The train pulled away. Wade and Grace stood on the platform, watching it disappear, wondering if they'd see the boy again, if war would take him as it had taken so many. But that was tomorrow's worry. Today they walked home together, through the streets of Fort Benton, past the marshal's office where it had all changed, back toward the mountains. Do you think he'll be okay? Grace asked. I think we gave him the tools. The rest is up to him. Same as it was for us. Same as it is for everyone. They reached the livery, mounted horses, rode toward the high country, behind them civilization, ahead the Bitterroots. And somewhere between the two, in that space where wild met tame, where past met future, where broken met whole, was home. They rode in silence, comfortable, complete. The mountains stood eternal, witnesses to their story, guardians of their legacy. And in the shadow of those peaks, the legend of the Bitterroot Reckoning passed into history. A story of survival, of sacrifice, of second chances, of how sometimes the family you build is stronger than the family you're born to, of how the mountain doesn't just take. Sometimes if you're strong enough, brave enough, stubborn enough, it gives back. And of how even in the darkest winter, the human spirit can burn brighter than any fire. The end came not with thunder, but with quiet, with an old man and woman riding home, with the knowledge that they'd lived fully, loved deeply, fought fiercely, and in the end that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.